Welcome to the ACONIC Podcast with me, Soon Yu, your host. The ACONIC Podcast features candid conversations with successful Asian and AAPI leaders who share their personal journeys of challenges and triumphs. The ACONIC Podcast is brought to you by the Asian American Foundation, by Gold House, and by the founders of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and is made possible through the generous support of Altos Ventures. In this week's episode, we are speaking with Tiffany Chang. Unlike many of our previous guests, she is somebody who is actually at the beginning of her hero's journey. It's a refreshing reminder of what it's like to stand at that starting line, full of potential and possibility. But even in these early stages, Tiffany has already done some truly heroic things. Sometimes, a fresh perspective can be just as inspiring as a seasoned one.
Growing up, I didn't realize this till after, but I actually wanted to be friends with more of my American, white friends rather than sort of embrace my Asian heritage. And then going through that sort of period of discrimination and stuff like that, that instead actually enhanced that sort of experience where I'm like, oh yeah, I want to become more white. I want to assimilate to sort of the American culture, right? So it just became a point where I was trying to hide everything Asian about me.
I'm very excited today to welcome Tiffany Chang to the podcast. Tiffany, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Oh no, I'm extremely excited to have you. Obviously, anybody who's looked up the podcast and saw the title episode knows your current title. You are Miss Asia USA. Prior to that, you were Miss Taiwanese American, and I believe that was in 22, right? 2022.
Yeah, 2022.
Great. And I just want to start off the bat by saying this. Obviously, you're incredibly accomplished, especially at your younger age versus some of my guests. Okay, you're probably less than half the age of most of the guests I have on. And I came in with some initial biases because I didn't fully understand the pageant world, and obviously thinking I had a younger guest. And I was wrong. Whatever credibility being wrong has in this podcast, let me just say to the audience, I was wrong. I had misperceptions and unconscious bias. And in doing research on you and learning about your story, I'm so excited to share it with the audience today. So I just want to start off by saying I was wrong.
Thank you. A lot of people come in with that bias as well. You're not the only one.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to own that. But then I also kind of want to set the stage and, let the audience and kind of enjoy this conversation we're about to have. Let's talk about some of your accomplishments. Obviously, we talked about some of the major titles you've won. Actually, the Miss Asia USA is a national title. You've also at an early age started a nonprofit. You're a student at Stanford, not a small school, not an unknown school, right? And you're a double major. You're also a research assistant, and I could go on and on and on about the accomplishments. But I think where I was really wrong was this idea, it's not the accomplishments that make you who you are. This idea that you have such incredible, what I would call character and substance, married with the idea of agency, married with the idea that you're doing something with it, married with the idea that you're being courageous and bold and trying stuff. And I think we'll obviously start from the beginning and talk about your childhood, but I doubt you kind of grew up thinking, I'm going to be a beauty queen, right? That was probably not in your thinking.
Absolutely not.
So talk a little bit about growing up and what that was like, and kind of what was mainly on your mind as you were a child.
Yeah, so growing up, I grew up actually in a very Taiwanese family. I grew up actually with my grandparents. Every day after school, I would, go to my grandparents' house, hang out with my grandma until pretty much after dinner. That's when I would head back home. And so, I would eat Taiwanese cuisine, speak Taiwanese dialect at home. And so this was sort of the backdrop of my childhood. And even though it might have seemed that I had really strong Asian roots, I found myself sort of in confusion. I sort of had a lack of identity. I didn't know even though I was raised in an Asian household, I didn't know what it meant to me. And so that didn't actually click to me until around in middle school when we always had, all these talent shows and whatever. And then I used to play the guzheng, the Chinese zither. And then there was this
Wait,
one
let me just
moment.
pause. Explain to the audience what that is. It looks like a harp, kind of, that
Yes.
sort of sits on the table, and you play it almost like a harp. Is that kind of
Right,
fair?
exactly. It's like a very long instrument and has a lot of like these strings, and then you play it, and the notes are actually a number. So it's a very ancient, traditional um, Chinese, Asian type of instrument. It has such long roots in our Asian history. So I started playing that around when I was in elementary school. So I would play it every year for my talent show. And then there was this one year where one of my classmates, she was like, "Oh, are you going to play like ugly instrument again and wear that ugly oriental dress?" And to me, that really just struck me because no one has ever said such an extreme comment to me, like targeting my Asian American heritage. And then when that happened, from then on I realized that I was actually embarrassed and ashamed of my Asian heritage. It was a point where I hit sort of a low point. And from then on, um, I've always been such an introverted and shy girl. But from then on, it really got to a point where it was pretty bad. I was not able to participate, for example, in any school discussions because I would get so nervous. It was sort of like I was trying to suppress myself. And so that was a really difficult point from middle school, even throughout high school, where I had to deal with that.
Yeah, I think I can relate. I think many of us in the audience can relate with the idea of being called out for being different, and something honestly that we actually
Right.
had very little control of. And I remember growing up thinking, I don't want to be seen speaking, Taiwanese with with my
Right.
parents because it just sounded rough, it sounded different, and then people would look and stare at me. And I think you said this in an interview, and actually, and I shared the same sentiment when that happened. I found myself wanting to be more like everybody else and be more American than I wanted to necessarily be Asian. Can you speak about how, especially being an introvert, that actually impacted your psyche?
Yeah. So growing up, I didn't realize this till after, but I actually wanted to be friends with more of my American, like white friends rather than sort of embrace my Asian heritage. And then going through that sort of period of discrimination and stuff like that, that instead actually enhanced that sort of experience where I'm like, oh yeah, I want to become more white. I want to assimilate to like sort of the American culture, right? So it just became a point where I was trying to hide everything Asian about me.
Yeah, and um, it's this idea of we are confused about our identity. I think when
Right.
we're young, there's an innocence to it, right? We're raised
Right.
and we see our relatives and we eat certain foods, and it's kind of clear. Of course, I'm Asian, right? And
Right.
then there comes a moment where it feels awkward to be so unique or different, or not to have the same experiences as the majority of people we're growing up with have. And
Right.
so I think it's quite natural. Add to the fact that you're an introvert, I think it probably impacted two areas for you. One was probably your confidence in your voice, and then
Hmm.
obviously a certain degree of a confusion, I guess, on the identity. Is that
Right.
fair?
You're right. Exactly. Yeah, those are exactly the 2 points. I became sort of voiceless for many years. I was truly voiceless at that time. I couldn't say anything. And then from that point on, I couldn't even insert my opinion in any discussion, or even if I had an opinion, I always doubted myself. So it became a point of one, I was ashamed of my Asian heritage, and two, I became unconfident. And I guess as an Asian American girl growing up, that was very damaging.
Wow, wow, that is a very relatable experience. But you said some things I thought were very poignant. You said that confidence isn't something you're born with. And then I think the other thing you said in terms of as it relates to the idea of wanting to have your voice heard, it's this idea that your analogy was kind of pressing the gas pedal fully while also holding the brake. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, you know that feeling when you're like, you want to express who you are and like your opinion, you have an opinion, but there's just something holding you back. And for me, I guess it was that that unconfidence, that fear of being judged that was holding me back despite knowing that I want to express myself. And so, and many times that's how I felt.
Yeah. And
And I
it's
think that's how a lot of
particularly
people, sorry.
it's particularly difficult when you're getting the comments from friends, right? People you want to be close to, people who you want to have a strong relationship with. And as children, I'm sure we don't realize that some things we say can be so hurtful, especially people we care about, and they're unfiltered, of course, right? So
Right?
obviously that was then. It's quite different now. You speak quite often. I'm sure you're still probably at heart an introvert, but you've had to learn, I suppose, some extrovert skills. Let's talk about that journey from that was kind of the low point where you doubted yourself, you were sort of confused about your identity. What happened, and what was the transition to get to a place where you said, maybe I do identify more with being Asian, and maybe I want to be able to speak up more. What was that journey like for you?
Right. So like I said, confident wasn't something, I don't think it's something that you're born with. It's something that you have to work towards. And so after I hit that low point, that's when I decided to actually move to, because I grew up mainly in an female family, with my grandma, with my mom, with my aunt. And so that's why I decided to actually transfer to an all girls school. And so from that point on, that's where slowly, I don't think I realized that at that point, but I was slowly trying to step outside of my comfort zone more and more because I wasn't proud of who I was because I wasn't able to speak up. And so, starting from high school, that's when I decided I want to change it. So, even though it was really uncomfortable for me at times, that's when I tried to insert myself in more like leadership positions. Actually, that's when I started to really explore my passions, such as like, for example, when I was small, I was really passionate. I loved knitting. And so I turned knitting into something that was even bigger, giving back to the community, becoming a leader in, maternal and child health care and empowering pregnant women. And so I slowly realized that as I empowered others and as I stepped outside of my comfort zone, that's when I slowly started to realize who I was and gain my confidence back.
That's great. So you actually push yourself. You push yourself to try new things, to do things that probably were a little outside your comfort zone, and you started to get involved in things you actually cared about. Are you ready to be part of a community that amplifies the voices of Asian leaders in business, government, and the arts? The founders of this podcast are members of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, whose mission is to empower Asian and AAPI voices in our community. By subscribing to this podcast, you'll stay up to date on the latest ACONIC episodes, and importantly, gain exclusive invitations to select Stanford Asian alumni events that can provide useful insights and a powerful network to help you on your personal and professional journeys. Go to aconicpodcast.com and subscribe today. Join us and be a part of a community that's shaping the future of Asian leadership.
Like we're told when we're younger, especially being an Asian American woman, we should be quiet, we shouldn't speak out for ourselves. And so through this experience, I realized that, no, I want to be able to, show who I am, show my culture and my identity. And so that was a part of myself that I had long overlooked. And so this journey not only really strengthened my connection with my Taiwanese identity, but also taught me the power of like using my voice and advocating for what I'm passionate about.
So two things, right? sort of pursuing things that you're interested or passionate about. And the other element is also trying things that maybe aren't exactly comfortable. And let's actually talk a little bit about your nonprofit. I think it's called Mad Hatter Knits. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Matt Hatter knits.
And when I heard your story about this, I thought, wow, it's really interesting. This is a situation where you had an early passion for something that most people probably had no passion for. And then there was a happy accident along with, call it a relative or family member that kind of redirected how to use that happy accident. Most people, when they're doing it, you hear people, oh, they start a nonprofit. They were probably just trying to checklist something to get into Stanford, right?
Hmm.
That wasn't actually the situation because the passion started, I think, early on in elementary
When
school.
I was
And
like in
then,
fourth grade,
and
yeah.
your nonprofit happened in middle school. So this is like way early. Can you talk a little bit about how you actually founded this whole thing?
Yeah, so I found it obviously not by myself. It was, yeah, completely by accident. I started knitting when I was in fourth grade, when my fourth grade teacher started to teach me every recess. So instead of like playing with other people, I'd be knitting with my teacher. Um,
Introvert.
yeah, exactly. The introvert in me. So then one day I was like, oh, I want to learn how to make a hat just because I was curious. So I asked my mom. My mom took me to local Michael's, right? And then we ended up buying this really small, like circular loom. And I was like, okay, perfect. I don't know why it looks so tiny, but I'm just gonna try to make a hat. Followed the instructions. It came out like the size of a fist. Probably, yeah, it's around the size of a fist. And then at the time, my cousin was working at the San Gabriel hospital in the NICU department. And
In the what
she
department?
was in the NICU. So NICU stands for neonatal intensive care
Thank
unit.
you. I did not know, but I figured it was probably related.
No problem. Yeah. So it's where a lot of babies go if they're born too early. And so at the time she was working there and she was like, oh, these hats would actually be perfect for these premature babies because one, the hat actually helps them maintain their body heat and their warmth because or else the warmth escapes from their head. And so from there, I was like, oh, okay. So we started donating just like from 2016, one batch of like 60 hats to Children's Hospital. And from there, it sort of just grew.
Wow, that's truly amazing. I remember when my child was born, he had the iconic blue and pink hat. Remember that one? That sort of, yeah.
Yes.
But for I think premature babies, that one was probably too big. So wow, it all sort of was serendipity. And then from there, you actually founded a nonprofit, which I think is pretty amazing.
Right, right. This has been something that's been very fulfilling for me because at first we just focused on just premature babies. Then during COVID, we started packaging, focusing on like pregnant women because it was a really difficult time for a lot of mothers going through that because when they would have to deliver or go through labor, they had to be completely alone, completely alone to all their appointments and everything. And so that's when we decided to shift our focus from not just premature babies, but also mothers as well. And so, yeah, it's just been such a fulfilling journey for me giving back to the community because, as I said, I grew up in a pretty much an all-female family. So, giving back to like also the women, a community of women who are going through a difficult time. And so now we've developed international chapters from all over the world.
Wow. So again, like I said, substance and character. It's great. And I think part of the character, let's talk a little bit about character. You grew up with strong matriarchs, strong role models that were female, your mom, your grandmother, right? How did that influence you, both early on, but probably more so now as you are, in the roles that you're playing?
I grew up with primarily my grandma was a huge role model growing up. She was the matriarch of the family. Whenever we would make any major decisions or like anything, we would always have to go to my grandma first. And so I think that's a very unique background because she instilled a lot of values in me when I was younger. She always told me, how important it was to, persevere through any challenges, not give up, because anyone can, some people might be, naturally born smart or anything, but hard work is something that she said is like very important. And so I think just growing up with her and a lot of female role models in my life just made me also realize that I want to also become like them, right? I want to also, um, be independent, be able to have my voice. They're not afraid of really going for whatever challenges or any obstacles. And so having them in my life just made me realize that I want to be like them someday.
So it's interesting. You grew up with these strong values and this sort of passion or desire. Obviously, it was somewhat stunted by some of the experiences that made you lose your voice and made you lose some of your confidence and created some of that self doubt. Um, and then I have a sense that you probably focused on other winning formulas. Maybe I have a sense if you got to Stanford, you're probably a bit of a bookworm or fairly academic in middle school and in high school. Is that fair?
Yes, that's very fair. I was very much of like a typical nerd in high school. I never went pretty much to any parties. I was always studying. And I guess that's a good and bad thing. I mean, I think that's sort of what got me into Stanford.
It's interesting. So around high school is when you said, "Look, two things happened. I think you became much more aware of your own heritage, and therefore your identity started to evolve. And you also chose some experiences that actually put you in an uncomfortable place, but also helped you find more of your voice, both in terms of the experiences, but also in terms of forcing you to learn new skills. Can you talk about your decision to actually pursue Miss Taiwanese American?
So I pursued Miss Taiwanese American right after I graduated high school. And so even though I started to find more leadership positions, I was a little more comfortable in using my voice. It was still something that I wasn't. It was still really hard to express myself at times. And even now, I think I'm still on this journey of, finding who I am and, being, I think we're always, trying to improve ourselves. But my decision for Miss Taiwanese American was, so I got into Stanford early. And so I had a little bit of time. I was like, okay, so this is the one summer where I can really do anything I want, right? I actually heard of Miss Taiwanese American a few years back from previously from when I was applying. And so that's when I decided that I want to sort of explore more of my Taiwanese American heritage and my culture, because even though I grew up in a Taiwanese family, I didn't really know what it meant. And so I decided to, dip my toes in the sort of the pageantry world, but at the same time, explore my Taiwanese culture. And so that's why I decided to participate in it.
That's great. And I think a couple things happened there. One for you, it's actually been a wonderful journey because it's helped you, I think, connect better with your identity and the experience, including the training, including all the stuff, actually helped you find a stronger and more vibrant voice too. And at the same time, I think it's been good for the pageantry world in that you are actually helping break a lot of misperceptions. But let's talk about the first part first. Let's talk about the idea that when you did Miss Taiwanese American, I don't, did you expect the amount of training and the type of training that they were providing?
I didn't, to be honest, because I never used to do pageantry. I've only been in it for 2 years, so I did not really know what I was getting myself into at all. But yeah, the training, there was a full 7 to 8 weeks of training. It was every weekend, Saturday, Sunday, for about 6 to 8 hours, actually. So it was pretty long. And I realized that the training wasn't just what you would typically expect in pageantry, like, catwalk, hair and makeup classes, but it taught us a lot of, like, for example, self-presentation, how to speak articulately, learning about Taiwan history, Taiwanese identity, stuff like that. And so going through that sort of rigorous training allowed me to become more comfortable with speaking out, being able to present myself and speak out for myself better.
I think something that was really interesting is that I guess Miss Taiwanese, they actually don't have swimsuit, which is not typical.
Right.
And they have one part that is very typical is the talent show. So people sing, they dance, they do some musical stuff, whatever it might be. you decided to do something a little bit different in the talent show. Can you tell audience what you actually ended up doing?
Yeah, so I knew from the get-go for my talent show, I wanted to show a different side of myself. Um, and I actually had a really hard time brainstorming. I wanted to show that I was a woman in STEM, because I think that's a very like unique angle. And so at first I explored, oh, what if I do like a chemistry experiment and all that? I tried many different things. And I landed on making the first ever pageant robot for the talent show. And so at first I actually went through many different prototypes. First was like probably one that was like, it was a normal size, pretty small robot. And for that one, they were like, oh, it's too small, blah, blah. So they were like, how's the audience going to be able to see it? So I ended up making basically a human sized robot that walked with me on stage.
So, one, it was powered by AI. You did all the coding yourself. I think you said that you even went to Home Depot to buy the materials, and you actually showed a video of you actually making the robot. And I think what was really cool is part of the demonstration wasn't just showing the video how you made it. You brought the robot on stage, and it catwalked with you. Is that right?
Yes, a cat walked with me. Yeah, it was really a difficult journey because just like going to Home Depot, making all the materials and everything, making sure everything looked nice on the outside, but was also functional. Um, it was, it's, I even still use it up to this day for some like fundraisers and galas. So it's all worth it.
Wow. So that is, I think, expanding the idea of talent. And in so many ways, you have been breaking a lot of the misperceptions that people have. I think it's ingrained in our culture when we grew up watching beauty pageants. I think there's some TV shows on it, Insatiable, whatever. Those all sort of promote certain misperceptions that, hey, it's beauty, not brains. I think you're saying it can be both, right?
It can be
And
both.
I think it's also this idea it's about vanity versus substance. Again, I think you're trying to challenge those type of assumptions too. Um, Talk about what made you decide to take what you had learned and your experiences in being Miss Taiwanese America and then deciding to go on a much more national stage and also one that actually talked about a broader experience of being Asian American, and that was Miss Asia USA.
Right. So after I won Miss Taiwanese American, that was sort of actually when my journey started. So throughout my first year of college, I was, going to many events. I emceed a lot of like banquets, including one for President Tsai Ing-wen, the former president of Taiwan. Um, and I was able to speak on many like talk shows and radio shows. And so by also collaborating with many different like local Taiwanese organizations, I was able to sort of amplify my voice within the community. And so from those experiences, I realized how fulfilling this work was for me, being able to sort of being a voice for our community. Because, like we're told when we're younger, especially being an Asian American woman, we should be quiet, we shouldn't speak out for ourselves. And so through this experience, I realized that no, I want to be able to, show who I am, show um, my culture and my identity. And so that was a part of myself that I had long overlooked. And so this journey not only really strengthened my connection with my Taiwanese identity, but also taught me the power of like using my voice and advocating for what I'm passionate about. And so from there, I wanted to continue this journey of self-discovery. And because this whole journey actually started with being discriminated for my Asian heritage, that's why I wanted to go on a larger platform to really be able to speak out for the Asian American community as in general as whole.
That's great. And I know part of it is also there's training involved in that program too. And one of those was sort of about cultural education. And I think you actually was responsible for teaching your fellow delegates, I suppose, about Taiwanese American cultures. Is that, and can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Right. So for some of the trainings that we had over the weekend, we had these potlucks. And so for these potlucks, we'd have to bring some like Taiwanese dishes or like our dishes from our culture. So from there, we would sort of go in like a circle, right? And talk a little bit about our culture, our heritage, sort of our journey and, why we're participating, why we're here today. And so I was able to tell some of my fellow delegates about also Taiwanese culture and heritage. And so actually when in the beginning, when I would talk, people were like, oh, Taiwan, is it like Thailand, blah, blah, blah. And so I realized a lot of people actually don't know Taiwan because it is a very like small island, right? And so it was really fulfilling being able to also talk and educate people on our culture.
That's great. And what I think is interesting is in this role, you've actually had to be more than Miss Taiwanese. You've actually had to be Miss Asia and actually had to probably participate in many different cultures, celebrations of Asian heritage. Is that right?
Right, right. And so the most fulfilling part is like through this role, I'm not only able to, it has allowed me to not only be able to represent, my heritage on a global stage, but I've also been able to advocate for the Asian American heritage and be able to, sort of be now a leader in our community.
On the ACONIC podcast, we really celebrate the idea of the hero's journey. And fortunately for us, one of our partner organizations is at the forefront of celebrating our great heroes and their stories. And that organization we work with is Gold House. Gold House is a cultural ecosystem that unites, invests, and champions Asian Pacific leaders to power tomorrow for all of us. To learn more, please visit goldhouse.org. Now, based on all your experiences, I mean, one of the main criticisms that you hear for anyone involved in fashion or pageantry work, and I was in fashion, obviously, in my career. I worked for a large apparel company. One of the main criticisms is that it objectifies women and it doesn't empower them, or it's sort of the idea it's against feminism. How do you react to that, and what are your experiences that either validate that or say otherwise?
Right. So I think that's a really big stereotype. I still feel that stereotype. Like a lot of people come up to me and they're like, "Oh, why would you decide to do, pageantry? Doesn't it objectify women?" But through my experience, I've actually had actually a pretty completely opposite experience, especially through, I guess it was from where I started, Miss Taiwanese American. They focused more on the substance and being and empowering women rather than, like you said, they didn't have a swimsuit section. They focused more on being able to solidify, like, who we are and empowering our community. And so even though I think in some cases I have experienced that, some people will objectify women, and it's really up to you to stand your ground. And, in pageantry, you're able to also select certain events you want to do, certain events you don't want to. It is in your control most of the time. So I think it's more on how you use the platform and being able to, speak up for yourself. But it's still, I do understand that there is still a very large stereotype around that.
Now, you're probably one of the youngest guests we'll probably have on the podcast. And what I love is this idea of reverse mentorship. And so obviously you have your grandma, your parents, other parents are listening in. What advice would you give us in terms of being able to both raise a great generation of kids and also just to, I think, better engage and relate with, I think, a younger generation?
I think including my parents, they're like, oh, everyone's afraid, I guess, of a failure, right? We're all like, oh, it's also a huge thing. I think especially in the Asian community, we're like, oh, it's not okay to fail, not include. It's people in the Asian community care a lot about face, like reputation, and so I think for a lot of people in the younger generation, they feel this pressure from, their parents or grandparents that, they always have to show this perfect self. And from what I've realized actually through this journey is that it's actually okay to fail, to show that you're not the most perfect person in the world. Even me, I seem to, have my life together, Miss Asia, going to Stanford, but it's definitely not all roses. I've had, moments of failure, moments of challenges where it's been difficult to, stand who I am and, continue to move forward. But I guess some advice I'd be is to realize that, failures is part of the journey. It's part of discovering who you are.
Well, that's music to this podcast's ear. As you kind of know, one of our main signatures is this idea of taking the taboo away from the idea of failure. And that's wonderful advice for my generation. And I know you mentioned this, that you're still on this journey. You're still, your identity is still evolving. And, I'm sure you went from being highly Taiwanese to all of a sudden realizing you're Asian American and you're connected to so many different cultures and things that makes us have shared experiences. As you look forward, what are the things that you're actually looking forward to? And what are certain risks that you're actually thinking of potentially exploring or taking? And I use that word just because we talked about it. But yeah, what's next?
I'm excited to continue this journey of continuing empowering the Asian American community, and then to also continuing my studies. And I think my eventual goal, especially as I've just declared my major as engineering management and human-centered design, is to build a future, not maybe in like technology, but build a future that's more sustainable. And so one of my biggest goals in the future is to hopefully start my own company, and maybe it's something that has a lot to do with the work I'm doing now, or maybe it has completely nothing to do with it, but that's something I hope to do one day.
Well, I love where you're at, which is you've got many options, all right, and you've created those, and that's fantastic. So I'll be very curious. I'll look you up in a few years, and we're going to talk again, and you're going to share some really interesting stories with me. Tiffany, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for opening up, sharing about some of your early adversity that kind of both put you down the wrong path, or wrong is probably the wrong way, just put you down kind of a darker path, but then your journey kind of to come out of that. I just think is so interesting. And I love the idea that you are a walking contradiction in terms of a lot of the stereotypes that are out there, and that you embrace that. So thank you so much for your agency and for the really taking your character and your substance and doing something with it with the platform you have.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been such an honor to be here.
Listen to all episodes of ACONIC on aconicpodcast.com. You can also catch new episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.